Hi, everyone. This is Eileen Schroff, and I'm excited to kick off the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center's course on caregiving and transportation. And I have the great pleasure today of being joined by our first speaker, Jane Mahoney. And she is going to provide us with our first presentation, setting the stage on these two topics of transportation and caregiving. And she'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that transportation is a critical support in the caregiving journey. And Jane is very well positioned to talk about this given her experience and her background. And she'll go over that a little bit once she starts, but I think you will all find her a wealth of information. So before I turn the screen over to her, I do want to give a little bit of a bio. Jane is currently working as a training and technical assistance specialist at the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center. And prior to joining the team at NADTC, she was an Older Americans Act consultant and caregiver support specialist. And there she provided training and guidance to family caregiver programs across Wisconsin. Jane continues to be passionate about caregivers in her work at NADTC and promoting transportation programs as a form of caregiver support. So as you can hear from that bio, there is no one better positioned to talk about this than Jane. And she's going to also join us in the discussion forums during the week when this is launched, and she'll be available directly to answer questions about the information that you hear today. So Jane, I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm really happy to be here today. As Eileen said, my name is Jane Mahoney, and for those of you who are not able to see me, I am a woman in my mid-50s with dark blonde, shoulder-length hair and glasses. And as you heard in the introduction, I do have a lot of background working in the field of family caregiver support. And when I decided to take this job at NADTC, I really wanted to explore some new topics, learn about transportation, and expand my horizons. But honestly, my passion for caregivers came right along with me. And one of my goals here in this job is to work on this intersection of caregiver support and transportation. And in my mind, I see a Venn diagram, as I have displayed on the screen here, with a blue caregiver support circle and a green transportation support circle. And in the middle is a nice blue-green section, and that is where caregiver support and transportation intersect and they overlap. And that's what this presentation is all about. So before we can talk about where transportation and caregiving intersects, I first want to give you an idea about what family caregivers are. I want to help you understand who they are, what they do, and get a peek at what their lives are like and where the challenges lie in supporting them. And then we'll talk a bit about how transportation and caregiver support intersects and finish up by talking about how transportation programs can improve their services to meet the needs of caregivers. I'm going to start by defining what a family caregiver is. So a family caregiver is a person who helps someone to care for themselves. I want to stress that this is not a paid professional caregiver that works in a care facility or a home care agency. This family caregiver has a relationship with the person they're caring for, usually a relative, maybe a friend or a neighbor. And the tasks that they help with are usually things that the person used to be able to do for themselves. And for various reasons, the person is no longer able to do them and now needs assistance. The assistance that the caregiver provides tends to enable those people to live in the community. There's really a focus on preserving independence and quality of life. Caregivers tend not to be compensated for their work. It is done out of love and often out of a sense of responsibility or obligation. Caregiving can be short-term or long-term. Sometimes it's helping someone to recover from an illness or a surgery, so it's a shorter-term relationship. But sometimes it's a longer-term commitment when they're providing care for someone who has a chronic condition or illness or disease. And the family caregiver may or may not live with the person they're caring for. But no matter what, the tasks that they are doing allows the person to live more independently. And typically, without the assistance of that family caregiver, that person would likely have to live in a care facility. So caregivers are extremely important to our society. I want to give you a profile of what family caregivers look like. AARP and the National Alliance for Caregiving do a survey about every 5 years to learn about what caregiving in the United States looks like. Their most recent survey was completed in 2020. And 7,309 people responded to the online survey. And the statistics I'll be sharing with you today come from this survey. It's called 2020 Caregiving in the USA. So from this survey, we found that 53 million caregivers, there are 53 million caregivers in the United States, and that is about 21% of the adult population. And as shown in the diagram with 5 people and one blue woman standing out, that's 1 in 5 people are caregivers. And I made the blue woman a woman because 61% of them are women. However, in these last couple of surveys, we are noting that more and more men are becoming caregivers, so that the percentage of women is decreasing. We know that the average age of a caregiver is about 49.4. And in this survey, 50% of the caregivers were caring for an aging parent, and 12% were caring for a spouse or a partner. Some of the other caregiving relationships are a parent caring for a child with a disability, siblings, grandparents raising grandchildren, or other relative relationships, as well as friends and neighbors. Also noteworthy is that 61% of the caregivers are employed. What do family caregivers do exactly? Well, there's really a wide range of tasks that family caregivers do, and as each caregiving situation is different. Some things can be relatively simple, like kind of household tasks, maybe cleaning, some laundry, home maintenance, preparing meals, maybe helping with paperwork or paying some bills. But these smaller tasks typically expand as time goes on. Some of the other tasks can include arranging for or accompanying people to medical or other appointments. It includes transportation for shopping, errands, socialization, things like that. Caregivers also provide tasks such as dressing, grooming, bathing, what we call activities of daily living. They might need to help the person walk, like particularly long distance or stairs. They may need help getting in and out of bed or a chair, and so the caregiver is there to help with that. Caregivers also provide supervision and safety. This is especially true for those caring for people who have dementia or Alzheimer's disease that need a lot of supervision. Caregivers also help set up medications and ensure the medications are being taken properly. And sometimes they even perform medical tasks like changing dressings or wound care. This is particularly true if they're caring for someone after they've been discharged from the hospital or from a surgery. Caregivers are frequently expected to do medical tasks that are rather uncomfortable for them to do. So the range of tasks that caregivers do is really wide. You may wonder, how much time do caregivers spend providing care? And I find these statistics to be rather shocking. On average, from the survey again from AARP, it says that caregivers spend 23.7 hours per week providing care. That's on average of the caregivers that responded to the survey. And their median was about 10 hours per week. But 32% of the respondents said they provide care for 21 or more hours each week, which is equivalent to a half-time job. And 21% of the caregivers that responded said they perform 41 or more hours of care each week. So that's the equivalent of a full-time job. And if you remember, 61% of the caregivers are also employed. And also 60% of those that are employed full-time. That's a lot. It's a lot of time. And that leads me into the next slide, which is about how caregiving affects the health and well-being. You see, think about the kinds of tasks caregivers are doing and the time they're spending providing this care. It probably isn't surprising to learn that caregiving can negatively affect the health and well-being of the caregiver. In the AARP survey, caregivers were asked to rate their health, and 41% of caregivers rated their health as excellent or very good, but compared to the general population that said 62% of them rated their health excellent or very good. And on the flip side, in the survey, 21% of caregivers rated their health as fair or poor. That would be compared to the general population, where only 12% of people rated their health as fair or poor. So we can see that caregiving does affect a person's health and well-being. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to support caregivers in any way we can. Not only are they providing service to keep people living in their community, but they're also affecting their health negatively. So we need to do what we can to support them. And that leads me to my next slide about caregiver stress. I just want to talk about this a little because this is really a huge concern. Caregivers do have quite a bit of higher levels of stress, and that's caused by several things. One of the things is an emotional stress. So if you remember, they're caring for someone that they love and that they have a relationship with. And it's really difficult to watch one of your loved ones change and to lose their ability to do things that they used to be able to do. And this is emotionally stressful for people. Role confusion is another thing that causes caregiver stress. For example, I'm caring for my mother who's having some pretty severe memory issues. So I used to call her and ask for help and advice, but now I'm the one helping her. So she used to take care of me, but now I'm kind of her caregiver. It's confusing. This also applies a lot for spouses. They met and they've had years of a mutual relationship, but now one of them is doing things for the other that they used to do themselves. I mean, maybe they're helping them get dressed. Maybe they're making sure they take their pills and things like that. And so they're kind of wondering, am I the spouse or am I a caregiver? It's confusing and it causes stress. Workload, we've already talked about the number of hours that they're spending providing care. So it's a lot, and that's very stressful. Also, these people, like I said, many of them have jobs. Many of them may have children of their own that they're also caring for. Caregivers tend to place unrealistic expectations of themselves to do more than they really can do. And this can be physically and mentally exhausting. And this definitely leads to the caregiver stress, but it also leads to the last bullet point, which is a lack of time for self-care. Now, caregivers are great at providing care for other people, but they are not so good at taking care of themselves. They really tend to put their own needs at the bottom of the list. The time that they used to spend with friends or rejuvenating by doing a hobby or something, they've put that to the side and they now spend that time caring for their loved one. And this again really increases stress and leads to burnout and decreases their health. So in my many years working with caregivers, I found that it really isn't always easy to provide support to them. No matter how much you want to help, it can be challenging. And like I said, they're helpers. They're really good at giving care and not so good at receiving care. So I wanted to share some of the common caregiver responses that I found working with caregivers. It's just to give you a picture of sort of what you might be facing if you are going to be working with caregivers. The first thing that you're going to hear is they just don't see themselves as caregivers. They're going to say, I'm not a caregiver. I'm a daughter. I'm a spouse. I'm a grandma. I'm a sister. This is just what I do. It's expected of me. So I don't really need your help. This is my job. I'll do it. Or you'll hear that I'm just too tired to look for help. It's just easier to do it myself. Yeah, there might be a transportation program that could take my mom to get her hair done every week, but I got to figure out who to call. I got to make that arrangement. Too much work. I'm too tired for that. I'm just going to do it. Or we hear, oh, no. Nobody can do this as good as I can. I just don't trust anyone else to do this. Or the caregiver might be willing to, but they'll say, oh, my husband would never let someone do that. He wants me to do it. So these are some of the things you're going to hear. Another thing we hear is, I didn't know what help I need. There'll be well-intentioned people that will say, let me know what I can do to help. I can tell you're stressed out. Tell me what I can do. But caregivers don't necessarily know what they need. They know they're tired. They know they're exhausted, but they don't necessarily know how to get that help. They don't know what to ask for. And then the last bullet point I have is kind of a tough one to hear, and that's, I didn't know that was available. I would have used it had I only known. And sometimes we hear this after the caregiving situation has ended, and it hurts because it's like, I wanted to help, but they didn't know. And you might have even told them, you might have given them the brochure about what's available, but in their stress, it didn't even register, or they couldn't take the time to comprehend what that might look like. So that's another thing we often hear. And also sometimes there is just a resource overload. They're given so many options, it's just too much and they just shut down. So those are some common caregiver responses when you're working with caregivers. So now you have a little peek at what caregiving is, what it looks like, and some of the struggles caregivers face. So I want to move next to talk about caregiving and transportation, that inner circle. So in that same AARP survey, caregivers were asked what types of activities they do for their care recipient. And you won't be surprised to see that the most common activity that caregivers do is transportation. So in the survey, 80% of caregivers said they provide transportation as one of their caregiving duties. And 78% said they help with grocery or other shopping. Those were the top two tasks that caregivers do. And both of those involve transportation. In 2021, NADTC also did a survey as part of their diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative. And the results basically mirrored what the AARP survey said, and that was that 78% of the caregivers said they provide transportation. And then 42% also said they arrange transportation. So this is where transportation and caregiver support interacts. This is that sweet spot in the middle of my Venn diagram. We went on to ask in our survey where caregivers are taking their loved ones. Where are these trips to? And their answers were, the top answers were medical appointments in the pharmacy, grocery shopping and other stores, social activities, which included church, community events, visiting family or friends, and then finally day programs, employment, volunteering. So if you're a transportation provider, could your agency help with any of these trips? And I'm sure you're saying, yeah, of course, these are the kinds of trips that we provide. Now, here's the real zinger. The next question we asked was, have you ever used a transportation service to help you with your caregiving? And 25% of the respondents said, yes, I've tried it. I've tried using a transportation service. And 75% said, no, I've never tried using a transportation service. Wow, that's a lot. This is a real significant finding, and it makes the discussion that we're having about caregiving and transportation even more pertinent. So why aren't more caregivers using transportation services? The trips they're taking are trips that you can provide, but they're not using it. So in addition to the quotes I shared earlier that helped us understand why caregivers aren't really utilizing other support services in general, we know that there are plenty of potential barriers specific to using transportation services as well. And some of these barriers include the following. They've just never used transportation before. My mom, my spouse, person I'm caring for, they've always just driven themselves. They don't know how to use public transportation. They don't know how to use the bus. They don't know how to do a dial-a-ride. They just don't know how. I'll just do it for them. Another barrier is, how are they going to get to the bus stop? And how are they going to get from the bus to where they're going? If I have to take them to the bus stop, I might as well take them all the way, is what they're kind of thinking. But you know that this is a real common thing. It's the first mile, last mile issue. And this is a typical thing that you are addressing in your programs. Another barrier is issues around accessibility. How will they get on and off the bus? Is the vehicle accessible? Do the drivers know how to help? Or are they even allowed to help? Will they be safe? Safety concerns. Also, a need for supervision. A lot of people just think that their loved one can't go alone. I know I wouldn't be comfortable sending my mother, who has memory loss issues, alone. They need supervision. So that's a barrier for them to use transportation. And then there's just the overall lack of knowledge about transportation services. Caregivers just don't really know what's available. And they certainly don't know about the additional support services that could help meet their needs. And honestly, they probably don't even think about the fact that transportation could be something that could help them out. I know in my work with caregivers, I did caregiver support groups for many years, and sad to say, I never had anybody from our local transit come and do a presentation about the services they offer. It just isn't talked about a lot in the caregiving circles. That's what I want to change. Oops. So these are some of the barriers to explain why caregivers may not be using transportation services. So I'm hoping that understanding some of these barriers will help transportation professionals improve their services to support caregivers. So how can they do that? How can transportation programs better support caregivers? So I'm going to talk about some things that include the existing services that you already have and how you can talk about transportation to caregivers, seeking input from caregivers, as well as forming partnerships with caregiving professionals. So many transportation programs already have services that offer the kinds of support caregivers are looking for. You don't necessarily have to rethink how to provide services just for caregivers. You do a lot of it already. Caregivers just don't necessarily know about it, or the service you have might need to be adjusted or tweaked just a little bit to individualize it to meet some unique needs that caregivers have. And the first one that comes to mind is mobility management. Having a mobility manager to help a caregiver find the options that will work best for their care recipient could be just the thing that a caregiver needs to have them access your service. Travel training is another common service that a lot of agencies have that caregivers probably don't know about. And this is a perfect thing for the caregiver who says, hey, my person just doesn't know how to do this. She's never done it. So travel training is a service that could be expanded on to help caregivers. Bus Buddies is another great program. Maybe not everyone has this, but it's a relatively common program. And that's a great support and a great response for caregivers who say, you just can't go alone. Now, I would send my mom if there was a volunteer bus buddy to ride with her. That would make me feel comfortable. Comprehensive driver training, another thing that you guys do, but caregivers don't necessarily know about it. They don't know how the drivers are trained. And this is actually another area that could be enhanced or individualized to meet the caregiver's needs better. I mean, there might be an opportunity for a caregiver to help provide some training to the drivers if it's going to be an ongoing service that would provide the training that the driver needs and comfort for the caregiver to realize that they're going to be okay. As mentioned before, first mile, last mile services. This is not a concern unique to caregivers, and it's something that transit providers are working on a lot. So this can also be worked out with the caregiver. And then door to door and door through door services are definitely things that would appeal to caregivers. Some people are not concerned so much about how things are going to go on the ride. It's how you're going to get them ready for the ride and to the actual vehicle and then to where they're going. So these are services that are commonly provided that could be really beneficial for caregivers, especially if they could be modified a little in certain situations. Some other services that also could make transportation more realistic for caregivers include, again, things that you may already provide, such as the fact that caregivers could ride along free of charge. This may make a big difference for a caregiver. Cashless payment options is another helpful service. Removing the need for the person to carry cash or having to count out change is a great service for a caregiver. Reminder calls. Now, this sounds really simple, but I can set up an appointment or a transit to pick up my mom to take her to her hair for an appointment, for example. But by the time the person arrives, my mom's not going to remember. And I know I could remind her, but I'm working and I will forget. So just something simple like providing reminder calls could be really helpful for a caregiver. Adding the ability for the driver to stop at the pharmacy after a medical appointment. Again, a relatively simple thing that can make a lot of difference to a caregiver. Any small barrier that can be removed can be the difference between a caregiver accepting the ride or saying, you know, never mind, I'll just do it. It's easier to do it myself, right? And then I've highlighted the last bullet, which is outreach to caregivers about transportation options. Caregivers, as I said, just don't really know about what's out there. So doing a better job of outreaching specifically to caregivers could really help improve your services. I'm going to take just a little pause here to talk about something a little different. And that is how you talk about transportation to caregivers and caregiver support professionals. So in the world of caregiver support, respite is a real big buzzword. It's an integral part of supporting caregivers. Respite care is just huge. And respite is defined as a short rest or a short break from something difficult. For caregiver support, respite care is typically provided by a home care worker, let's say, going into the home, taking over taking over the caregiving responsibilities so the caregiver can get out and do something for themselves. Or respite might be provided through a day program where the person would go for socialization and some supervision and activities and maybe meals for a few hours for the day. And again, this allows the caregiver to go do something else. But respite could also be defined as having someone take over a responsibility or a task to give them a break. Now, we know from the statistics that transportation is on the to do list of 80% of caregivers. So we know then that if we could provide transportation and take that off of their to do list, that we are in essence giving them respite because we're giving them time to do something else. So, as you are talking about transportation with caregiver support professionals and caregivers, instead of introducing it as sort of a different service that might be helpful, frame it as respite. If you say transportation is a type of respite, it might be seen as a more legitimate service to consider, promote, and use. So, and it might get the attention of caregivers and caregiver support professionals and help them to be more open to it. So that's my buzz for the day, is thinking about transportation as respite. Another way to improve services to caregivers is to really intentionally seek caregiver input. Finding out from caregivers themselves what it is that they want and need is really the best way to improve services. Each caregiver has different needs and may have different responses. And so I think it's just super important to do what you can to get input from caregivers. This means you're going to have your surveys for your coordination plan. Get them to caregivers. Take them to caregiver support meetings or events. Interview caregivers if you can, or caregiver support professionals, and get their input on how transportation could serve them better. You may consider convening a focus group made up of caregivers. In all of these ways, you're going to be learning how to better serve your family caregivers in your community. How are you going to find these caregivers? And that's going to lead me to the next piece of next suggestion, and that is to connect with caregiver support agencies. I challenge you to learn about the caregiver support programs that are available in your community and discover where they intersect with your transportation programs. And there's a Venn diagram again. Find out what kind of support programs are available. You'll likely find support groups or classes. There might be a caregiver conference that's happening. Those happen frequently in November during family caregiver month. Now, are there things that your agency could do? You could perhaps provide transportation to the conference. You could have a vendor booth at the conference or provide a presentation about your services at a support group. See if there's day programs in your area. Day programs are a wonderful support to caregivers. It's especially a wonderful support if transportation is provided so the caregiver doesn't have to drop off and pick up their loved one at the day program. What about home care agencies? Find out what's available in your community, and then talk to the providers and find out where your programs intersect, because they certainly do. So as you are forming relationships with these agencies, you may end up wanting to invite one of them to participate in your transportation coordination committee. Or they may find that they would like you to join a caregiver coalition, because they too are seeking other agencies to help talk about improving caregiver support. Having these collaborations really break down the silos and improve the kinds of services you can offer. You could even consider partnering on some mutually beneficial projects, as I mentioned earlier, providing transportation to conferences or for a day program. But you've got to get conversation started. Not sure why my slides keep jumping on me. I like Helen Keller's quote here: alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. So, I think this is a really big takeaway I want you to go away with, and that is seeking out these caregiver support agencies and getting to know these programs and work together with them. I want to close by sharing a few examples of programs that are working directly to serve family caregivers. You'll see how community partnerships between transportation providers and agencies that support caregivers can result in some really great programs. My first example is a program that the Bayside Community Network has in Elkton, Maryland. Bayside Community Network offers residential and day programs for adults with developmental disabilities, and they provide tailored transportation for all of their services, which includes camps for kids with disabilities, day programs, social and recreational outings, employment, volunteering, etc. They have partnered with their local transit agency to provide the transportation for their services. This transit agency also provides travel training to their participants that's designed to meet the needs of people with disabilities. So, for example, they give longer time to learn the skills and they present the materials in different ways, such as they use more visual diagrams and more verbal rather than written directions that enables the people to understand and learn the materials. They also place value on the importance of providing a consistent driver, which really can make all the difference in the world to helping someone get comfortable using transportation. Their overall idea is to meet people where they're at and get them successful at their transportation programs. So this is a really great example of a transportation and caregiving program partnership that benefits everyone. The next example is the Area Agency on Aging of South Central Connecticut, who has a chaperone transportation program that utilizes a program called Trusted Rides Certified. This program uses volunteers as chaperones to provide door-through-door service. So the volunteer here does not drive, but instead accompanies the person to a medical appointment. The volunteer will meet the person in their home, help them get ready for the appointment, and then stays with the person on the ride to the doctor or the medical facility and through the entire appointment, and is there when it's time to go home. And then on the way home, the volunteer can also assist with filling the prescription and get them settled back at home after the appointment. They're really hoping to expand this to include non-medical rides as well. And it's providing a really great support for caregivers. And it's a good example of a partnership again. The last example is a home care agency in St. Cloud, Minnesota called Home Watch Caregivers. This agency offers the typical home care services where they send personal care worker goes into the home to provide care, but it also has a volunteer driver program. By separating out the transportation services, the personal care workers are freed up to provide the type of work they are trained for. And the transportation service that they're providing is a door-through-door, which we know is a critical piece for serving older adults and people with disabilities. So volunteers are providing reminder calls in these cases, and also their trips include up to 2 stops. So there's a really high demand for this service, and it's another great example of transportation and caregiver support agencies working together to serve caregivers. And then my final example is a partnership between a dementia-friendly coalition in Rock County, Wisconsin, and a transit agency who are working together to provide dementia-friendly transportation. And you're going to learn more about this in an upcoming module. And that's the end of my presentation. I have a list of resources here that might be helpful for you, and these are also going to be found on the course page, and I really encourage you to check them out. I look forward to interacting with you in the discussion forum. Please feel free to ask me anything, suggest some ideas I might not have addressed or haven't thought of, and share with me your response to the suggestions I offered. And please let me know if there are barriers that you are facing as you're serving caregivers or thinking about serving caregivers. I'd love to keep the communication and this conversation about transportation and caregiving going. So I look forward to interacting with you in the forum. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you, Jane, so much. We only have about a minute left in our recording, so maybe we can just do one follow-up question that I had. You talk a bit about the community caregiver support programs and the great work that they do, but also the difficulty that some people have in not knowing where to find that support, both individual caregivers and maybe professionals. So where are these programs housed, and how might professionals be able to connect with them?
Yeah, many of the family caregiver support programs are housed in area agencies on aging or aging and disability resource centers. Human services often have caregiver support programs or could connect you with the agencies that do provide that support, as well as like centers for independent living. Also, the Alzheimer's Association is available in most communities. So there's a lot of professionals out there, but I would probably start with your area agency on aging